The massive crystalline chamber stretched high above, its walls pulsing with soft blue light that cast strange shadows across the assembled beings. Hundreds of different alien species filled the observation galleries, some floating in containment fields, others perched on specialized seating designed for their unique anatomies. The air itself seemed to vibrate with tension as whispered conversations in dozens of languages created a low hum-throw. About the space dot at the center of it all stood the testimony podium, a sleek platform that rose from the polished floor like a monument to truth. And approaching it slowly, his massive form casting on shadows, was Vexthal, the Zephyrian warrior who had refused to speak for 3 long years. His reptilian skin bore the scars of countless battles, each mark telling a story of violence. Across the galaxy, 6 compound eyes, each the size of a human fist, moved independently as they scanned the crowd. His powerful arms hung at his sides, claws occasionally scraping against his ceremonial armor, the same armor he had worn during the Terran conflict. The translator device attached to his throat hummed softly as it calibrated to the chamber's acoustics. The tribunal leader, a towering Vorthan with crystalline features and robes that shimmered like starlight, raised one elegant hand. The chamber fell silent instantly, as if someone had switched off the universe itself. State your full name and complete service record for the official archives. The Vorthan's voice echoed through the chamber, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. Vexthal's massive chest expanded as he drew in a deep breath. His voice, when it came, was like grinding stone, rough, weathered, carrying the burden of memories that had haunted him for years. Vexthal, designation Omega-7, of the 47th Zephyrian Assault Division, serial number 2847 Alpha 9. 23 standard years of active military service spanning 12 major campaigns across the Outer Rim, veteran of the Andromedan Uprising, the Silicon Wars, and his voice caught slightly. The Terran conflict, the tribunal members, representatives from 7 different species, leaned forward slightly. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. For 3 years, Vexthal had been the most decorated survivor of the human war who had refused to speak about what really happened out there. Military psychiatrists, interrogation specialists, even mind readers had tried to extract his story. All had failed. "I'm here today," Vexthal continued, his 6 eyes focusing on different members of the tribunal, "because the galaxy deserves to know the truth about what we faced on the human worlds. Not the sanitized reports in your military databases, not the propaganda your leaders fed to your populations, the real truth." A ripple of movement went through the observation galleries. Recording devices activated, translators worked overtime, and beings from across the galaxy held their breath. The lead tribunal member, her crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights, spoke carefully. The official records state that the Terran conflict was resolved through superior galactic hegemony technology and tactics. Are you suggesting these records are incomplete? Vexthal's mandibles clicked, a sound like breaking glass that echoed through the chamber. In Zephyrian culture, it was a sign of deep emotional distress. Incomplete. His voice rose, carrying a bitter edge that made several observers shift uncomfortably. Your records are a lie. A carefully constructed fiction designed to hide the most terrifying truth our civilization has ever encountered. He began to pace, his massive form moving with surprising grace despite his bulk. Each step echoed through the chamber like thunder. The High Command briefed us before the invasion. They said humans were primitive, recent rivals to space travel, soft-skinned mammals who lived on a single world and had barely begun to explore their own solar system. His voice took on a mocking tone. They showed us anatomical scans. No natural armor, no claws, no venom sacs, No redundant organs, just pink. Fragile beings who would collapse at the first sign of real warfare. One of the tribunal members, insectoid klaxon with multifaceted eyes, leaned forward, and your initial assessment supported this intelligence, absolutely. Vexthal stopped pacing and turned to face the tribunal directly. We expected a quick campaign, maybe to standard weeks, 3 at most, orbital bombardment, ground assault, occupation. Integration into the hegemony, standard procedure weed, followed on 47 other worlds. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, forcing the entire chamber to strain to hear him. We expected frightened civilians running for evacuation ships. Surrender broadcasts within hours of our arrival. Maybe some scattered resistance from whatever passed for their military. But nothing organized. Nothing significant. The silence stretched like a hell breath on Kepler-4 to be. The third human colony world we hit. I watched something that shattered everything I thought I knew about warfare, about courage, about what it means to be truly alive. Vexthal's 6 eyes seemed to look through the chamber walls, seeing something far away and long ago. There was a human female named Hayun. Intel said she was an educator, someone who taught young humans basic knowledge. Not a warrior, not a soldier, just a teacher in a small settlement of maybe 300 beings. His voice began to tremble when our dropships came screaming out of the sky, when our plasma cannons began turning their buildings to glass, when our war machines started hunting their people through the streets. This teacher, this Hayun, did something impossible. The chamber was so quiet that the soft hum of life support systems seemed loud. She organized them, this soft-skinned, fragile being with no military training took command of 300 terrified civilians and turned them into something our tactical computers couldn't understand. They used farming equipment as weapons, irrigation systems as explosive delivery mechanisms. Even their children were running supply lines through maintenance tunnels our sensors couldn't penetrate. Vexthal's claws scraped against the podium as his grip tightened. For 6 hours, Hayun and her farmers held off my entire battalion. 6 hours. We had orbital support, plasma artillery, atmospheric fighters, and for companies of veteran shock troops, they had determination and improvised explosives made from fertilizer. The warrior's voice cracked when we finally overran their position. When the buildings were burning and the smoke was so thick you couldn't see your own claws, I found Hayun in the ruins of what used to be her school. She was dying, plasma burns covering most of her body. But she was still coordinating evacuation routes over a handheld communicator, still trying to save people even as her life leaked away. Vexthal looked up at the observation galleries, his 6 eyes blazing with an emotion that transcended species barriers. That's when I realized we weren't fighting humans. We were fighting something else entirely. Something that turned ordinary beings into legends. Something that made Daimon less than protecting others. The chamber erupted in whispers and clicking sounds as the implications sank in across hundreds of different species. We came to conquer a world of teachers, farmers, and shopkeepers instead. We found ourselves at war with heroes. The silence in the chamber deepened as Vexthal's voice took on a haunted quality. Like wind echoing through empty ruins, his 6 eyes seemed to lose focus, staring into memories that clearly still burned in his mind like fresh wounds. New Soul was supposed to be our easiest target. He began, his massive frame seeming to shrink as he spoke. Intelligence reports showed it was just a mining colony. 40,000 humans digging precious metals out of asteroid belts. No military installations. No defense platforms. Just civilian miners and their families living in pressurized domes on a dead rock. He paused, his claws making small scratching sounds against the crystalline podium as his grip tightened involuntarily. Command gave us 2 hours to secure the entire colony. 2 hours. We'd conquered fortified worlds in less time. A bitter sound escaped his throat, something between a laugh and a growl. My battalion commander, Beckmer, actually complained that the mission was too easy. Said we'd be back on the mothership before the victory feast was prepared. One of the tribunal members. A flowing energy being contained in a specialized chamber, pulsed with curious light patterns. What changed your assessment? Vex the less compound eyes focused on the being, each lens reflecting the chamber's blue light like tiny mirrors. Everything changed the moment our first dropship touched down in the colony's central plaza. His voice grew stronger, more urgent, as if the memories were pulling him back into that moment. The landing zone was perfect, flat, open, surrounded by civilian structures. Textbook assault positioning. Our sensors showed humans scattering in all directions. Exactly what we expected. Panic. Chaos. Easy targets. The warrior began to pace again, his heavy footsteps echoing through the chamber like a countdown to some terrible revelation. That's when Junho appeared. Just one human male. Maybe 30 years old. Wearing the simple clothes of a maintenance worker. Intel files said he repaired air recycling systems, fixed broken machinery. Nothing threatening about him at all. Vexthal stopped pacing abruptly, his entire body going rigid as the memory hit him. He came walking out of a side building carrying a piece of metal piping. Just walked straight toward our position like he was going to fix a broken water line. 43 fully armed Zephyrian shock troops with plasma rifles, this human with a metal pipe was walking toward us like we weren't even there. Several beings in the observation galleries leaned forward, sensing something important was coming. My squad leader, Vecthon, actually laughed. He said, "Look, the human wants to surrender his tools." We'd seen it before on other worlds, conquered beings offering their possessions as tribute, hoping for mercy. Vexthal's mandibles clicked rapidly, the sound like breaking glass. Junho got within 20 meters of our position before anyone realized he wasn't surrendering. He was attacking. The chamber fell so quiet that the soft hum of the translation devices seemed loud. What happened next violated every law of physics and biology I'd learned in 23 years of W. Our fare. Vecthon hit him center mass with a plasma bolt that should have vaporized his entire torso. The energy discharge was enough to punch through starship armor. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Junho stumbled. Steam rose from the wound in his chest. I could see his ribs through the burned flesh. But he didn't fall. He didn't scream. He just kept walking. A ripple of disbelief went through the assembled beings. Several species began rapid discussions in their native languages. The second shot took off his left arm at the shoulder. The third burned through his stomach. By the time Vecthon's rifle overheated, this human had absorbed enough firepower to stop a ground assault vehicle. Vexthal looked directly at the tribunal, his 6 eyes blazing with the intensity of absolute truth. And he was still moving, still fighting. He reached our ammunition cache and used his one remaining arm to pull the pin on a thermal grenade, used his own dying body to shield the explosion and direct it into our supplies. The warrior's voice cracked with something that might have been respect. Junho destroyed enough ammunition to supply our entire assault for 3 days, with a metal pipe and a grenade, while dying from wounds that should have killed him instantly. But Vexthal wasn't finished. His pacing resumed, more agitated now, as if the memories were forcing themselves out. That was just the beginning, while we were scrambling to reorganize after losing our supply cache. Their medic appeared, a human female named Sujin. She came running toward the plaza where our plasma bombardment had left dozens of human civilians wounded and dying. His claws scraped against his armor as he gestured. Standard military doctrine across every civilized species is simple. Medical personnel stay in protected areas until combat zones are secure. You don't run into active battlefields to treat casualties. It's suicide. Vex the less voice grew. Incredulous, Sujin ran directly into the crossfire. Our automated defense systems locked onto her immediately. Plasma bolts started tracking her movement. But she didn't take cover. She didn't retreat. She dropped to her knees beside the first wounded human. She reached and started treating injuries while energy blasts lit up the air around her. The chamber was so still that individual breathing patterns from different species created a complex rhythm. I watched her work for 17 minutes. 17 minutes under constant fire from our suppression systems. She moved from casualty to casualty, applying medical treatments, injecting stimulants, sealing wounds. Our targeting computers registered direct hits multiple times. But she kept working. His voice became almost reverent. The plasma burns went through her medical uniform and into her flesh. I could smell her skin burning. But she saved 12 humans before her body finally gave out. 12 lives saved while she was literally cooking. In her own damaged tissue, Vexthel stopped pacing and gripped the podium with all four hands. And when she couldn't stand anymore, when the damage was too severe for her to walk, Sujin crawled across broken pavement and debris to reach one more injured child. A human infant that had been separated from its family group. His mandibles clicked once, a sound of profound sorrow. She died shielding that child with her own body. Used her final moments to inject the infant with medical nanites that would keep it alive until Resk. You arrived. The silence stretched until one of the tribunal members, a crystalline being whose voice rang like struck metal, asked the question everyone was thinking. This behavior, it was isolated. Extreme examples. Vexthel Eslaf was hollow and bitter. That same day, during the same battle, we encountered Menwu. Intelligence said he was 18 standard years old, still practically a child by human development standards. He worked in the colony's communication center, routing messages between mining teams. The warrior's voice took on an incredulous tone. We needed to capture the main communication hub to prevent the humans from calling for reinforcements. Simple tactical objective. The building was connected to the rest of the colony by a single bridge, a narrow walkway about -1 meters long. His 6 eyes focused on different tribunal members as he spoke. Minwu was alone on that bridge when we approached. One human teenager with a handheld plasma cutter, a tool designed for cutting through metal. Not fighting wars. He should have surrendered immediately, should have run, should have done anything except what he actually did. The pacing resumed, more agitated than before. He stood his ground, this child. This maintenance worker faced down 40 veteran shock troopers with a mining tool and told us we couldn't pass. Vexthel's voice grew louder, more passionate. We offered him mercy, safe passage, even offered to relocate his family group to a protected world, standard occupation protocols. But Minwu just shook his head and said something that our translators took 3 attempts to process correctly. He looked directly at the observation galleries, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. He said, "You'll have to go through me first. Not for territory, not for resources, not for military advantage." He was buying time for his friends to escape through the evacuation tunnels. 30 seconds, that's all he needed to give them. 30 seconds of delay. The warrior's claws scraped against the podium so hard they left marks in the crystalline surface. It took us 47 minutes to get past him. 47 minutes of continuous combat against one human teenager with a plasma cutter. He used the bridge's maintenance systems as weapons, turned the lighting conduits into electric barriers, flooded sections with coolant gas to slow our advance, made that narrow walkway into a fortress. Vexthel's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the massive chamber. When we finally overwhelmed him, when his makeshift defenses were exhausted and his weapon ran out of power, Minwu was still standing, still fighting. He used his bare hands to try to stop us. His bare hands against 40 armed soldiers. The silence that followed was profound, loaded with implications that resonated across species barriers. That's when I understood what we were really fighting. Not just humans. We were fighting against an idea that terrified the hegemony leadership, more than any weapon or technology ever could. Vexthel looked directly at each tribunal member in turn. The idea that some things matter more than survival, that protecting others can be worth dying for, that ordinary beings can become extraordinary when they choose to stand up for what they believe. In his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. We came to conquer a species instead. We found ourselves at war with the very concept of heroism itself. The temperature in the crystalline chamber seemed to drop several degrees as Vexthel's posture changed. His massive shoulders sagged, and for the first time since beginning his testimony, he looked truly vulnerable. The scars across his reptilian hide seemed to darken, as if the memories themselves were casting shadows on his flesh. Titan station, he began, his voice barely audible, forcing the assembled beings to strain forward to catch every word. Even now, 3 years later, saying that name makes my blood run cold. He paused, his 6 compound eyes focusing on nothing, staring into a past that clearly haunted him every waking moment. By the 4th month of the Terran conflict, High Command was getting desperate. The humans weren't collapsing like every other species we'd conquered. If anything, they were getting stronger, more organized, more creative in their resistance. One of his Pharaons gestured toward the observation galleries, where hundreds of alien beings hung on his every word. Titan Station was their last major military installation in the outer colonies. A massive orbital platform built around an old asteroid, bristling with defense systems and housing nearly 50,000 humans. Command told us it was the key to breaking human morale once and for all. Vexthel began pacing again, but his movements were different now, more erratic, like a caged animal remembering a particularly brutal fight. They assembled the largest fleet in hegemony history for the assault, 347 warships. The flagship Eternal Dominion alone carried 12,000 troops, the cream of our military forces, orbital bombardment platforms that could crack planets, fighter squadrons that had never known defeat. His mandibles clicked rapidly, the sound echoing through the chamber like breaking bones. The battle plan was simple. Surround the station, demand surrender, and if they refused, we'd blast it to fragments and move on to Earth itself. Clean, efficient, overwhelming force, everything the hegemony had learned about warfare over 10,000 years of galactic conquest. A bitter laugh escaped his throat. We outnumbered the human defenders 100 to 1. They had 43. Military personnel, a few hundred civilians, and whatever weapons they could scrounge from a supply station that was never meant to fight a real war. Vexthel stopped pacing and gripped the podium with all 4 hands, his claws digging into the crystalline surface. The human commander was a woman named G1. Intelligence files said she was 32 years old. Trained as an engineer before joining their military. She'd never commanded anything larger than a single starship, never fought in a major battle. By every tactical assessment, she should have surrendered the moment our fleet arrived. His voice took on a tone of grudging respect mixed with terror. When Admiral Lekva transmitted the standard surrender demand, offering the humans safe passage in exchange for the station's immediate capitulation. Jiwon's response came back within minutes. Vexthal looked directly at the tribunal, his 6 eyes blazing with the intensity of absolute recall. 3 words. Just 3 words that changed the course of galactic history. Come and take it. The chamber fell so silent that the soft hum of life support systems seemed deafening. Admiral Dekvar was furious. He'd conquered 47 worlds and never had anyone refuse his terms so casually. He ordered immediate bombardment, full-scale assault. Everything our fleet could throw at that station, the warrior's voice, began to tremble. For 6 hours, we poured enough firepower at Titan Station to sterilize a small moon. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, quantum torpedoes that could punch through anything, energy beams that turned space itself into a weapon. His claws scraped against the podium as his grip tightened. The station's shields held for the first hour. When they finally collapsed, we expected to see a burning wreck ready for boarding. Instead, we found something that defied every law of physics our scientists understood. Vexthal's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the massive chamber. The humans had disconnected the station's structural integrity fields. They'd turned their own home into a kinetic weapon. While we were bombarding them, while their people were dying round them, G1 and her team were plotting a collision course with our flagship. Several beings in the observation galleries began rapid discussions in their native languages, the implications of what they were hearing causing visible distress among multiple species. A space station ramming a dreadnought is suicide. The station gets vaporized on impact. There's no tactical advantage, no military gain. It's just destruction for the sake of destruction. His mandibles clicked once, a sound of profound confusion, but that's not what the humans were thinking. While our sensors tracked their approach, while our weapons tried to destroy them before impact, they were broadcasting something that broke our tactical computers trying to analyze it. Vexthal looked up at the observation galleries, his voice carrying an emotion that transcended species barriers, children's songs, human children singing lullabies and playground rhymes. Gentle melodies about friendship and hope and tomorrow being a better day. The warrior's voice cracked with something that might have been more. Diwan herself was singing. Our communications ray picked up her voice in the final minutes before impact. She was singing to her crew, to her people, to anyone who would. Listen, something about stars and dreams and never giving up. He paused, his massive form seeming to shrink as the memory overwhelmed him. The impact destroyed both vessels instantly. Titan Station, built over decades of human engineering, reduced to glowing debris in microseconds. The eternal dominion, pride of our fleet, cracked open like an egg and vented 12,000 of our finest soldiers into the vacuum of space. Vexthal's voice dropped to barely audible levels, but in those final seconds, as her station was being torn apart by the collision, G1 transmitted one last message. One final communication that reached every ship in our fleet. The silence stretched like a herald. Breath across the entire chamber. She said, "Tell your children what courage looks like. Not a threat, not a curse, just a teacher's final lesson." The warrior looked directly at each tribunal member in turn. That transmission did something to our forces that no weapon ever could. It made them think, made them question, made them wonder what they were really fighting for. His voice grew stronger, more urgent. You have to understand. Zephyrian culture values survival above everything else. We fight to live. We conquer to grow stronger. We expand because it makes us safer. But the humans, they were dying to prove a point, sacrificing themselves not to win, but to show us something. Vexthal began pacing again, his movements agitated. After Titan Station, everything changed. Our soldiers started asking questions they'd never asked before, in the barracks, in the mess halls. During combat operations, they kept coming back to the same thoughts. His claws scraped against his armor as he gestured. Why were we trying to conquer beings who valued freedom more than life itself? What were we going to do with subjects who would rather die than submit? How do you govern people who turn their own homes into weapons rather than surrender? The warrior's voice took on a tone of growing realization. Our military psychiatrist started reporting unusual behavior among the troops. Soldiers refusing orders to target civilian areas, pilots deliberately missing targets during bombardment runs, even some unit commanders questioning the strategic value of the entire campaign. He stopped pacing and faced the tribunal directly. The humans had weaponized something we'd never encountered before, the power of inspiration. They weren't just fighting to protect their territory. They were fighting to prove that some things mattered more than survival, that dignity and freedom and hope were worth dying for. Vexthaless mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. High Command tried to contain the effect. They classified all reports about Titan Station, restricted communications between units, even brought in loyalty enforcement squads to monitor troop morale. His voice grew darker, but it was too late. The humans had already won the most important battle of the war. They'd turned our own warriors against the idea of conquest itself. The warrior looked up at the observation galleries, his 6 eyes reflecting the chamber's light like tiny stars. We came to Titan Station with the largest fleet in hegemony history, expecting an easy victory. We left with 12,000 dead soldiers and an army that no longer believed in what they were fighting. G4, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. G1 and her 43 defenders had done the impossible. They'd defeated us without firing a shot at our fleet. They'd won by showing us what we were trying to destroy. Vexthaless final words echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell. After Titan Station, the war was already over. We just didn't know it yet. The crystalline chamber seemed to pulse with an almost living energy as Vexthaless' testimony reached its most devastating revelations. His massive form had begun to shake, subtle tremors that ran through his armored hide like aftershocks from some internal earthquake. The 6 compound eyes that had seen the destruction of worlds now reflected something far more dangerous than any weapon. Doubt. After Titan Station, High Command realized they were facing something unprecedented. Vexthal began, his voice carrying the weight of a civilization's crumbling certainty. Not just military resistance, but ideological contamination. Our own soldiers were beginning to question orders they'd followed without hesitation for centuries. He gestured toward the observation galleries with one of his forearms. The movement sharp and agitated. General Corthovan, Supreme Commander of the Terran Campaign, issued emergency protocols. Any soldier showing signs of human sympathy was to be immediately transferred to rear positions. Communication with home worlds was restricted, even personal. Messages to families were censored. His mandibles clicked rapidly, the sound like breaking glass echoing through the chamber. But the damage was spreading faster than they could contain it. Squad leaders were reporting troops deliberately missing targets. Pilots were developing mysterious navigation errors that kept them away from civilian areas. Even our logistics crews were accidentally delivering supplies to the wrong coordinates. Vexthaless' voice took on a tone of incredulous wonder. It started small. A gunner who claimed his targeting system malfunctioned when aiming at a human school. A transport pilot who reported engine trouble whenever ordered to carry prisoners to interrogation facilities. Individual acts of defiance that Command could explain away as equipment failures or combat stress. One of the tribunal members, a flowing energy being contained in a specialized chamber, pulsed with questioning light. Patterns. When did High Command recognize the true scope of the problem? The warrior's laugh was hollow and bitter. When entire battalions started requesting transfers to different theaters of war. When decorated veterans with centuries of service began filing formal objections to mission parameters. When our own intelligence officers started losing intercepted human communications instead of passing them up the chain of command. Vexthal began pacing again, his heavy footsteps creating a rhythm like a funeral march. That's when they brought in the Thought Guards, specialized units trained to monitor soldier loyalty and eliminate ideological threats. They installed surveillance systems in every barracks, every mess hall, every gathering place where troops might discuss their experiences. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the massive chamber, but it was already too late. The humans had planted something in our minds that no surveillance could detect, a question that grew stronger every time. We tried to suppress it. What were we really fighting for? The pacing stopped abruptly as Vexthal gripped the podium with all four hands. Then came the transmission that shattered everything we thought we knew about warfare, about honor, about the nature of our enemies. Several beings in the observation galleries leaned forward, sensing that they were about to hear something that would change their understanding of the conflict forever. Our communication rays intercepted a broadcast from Earth. Standard procedure was to analyze all human communications for a tactical intelligence. What we found instead was something that broke our soldiers' hearts. Vexthal's sixth eye seemed to look through the chamber walls, seeing something far away and impossibly beautiful. It was a memorial service, humans gathering to remember their dead from the war. We expected propaganda, calls for vengeance, hatred directed at us for the destruction we'd brought to their worlds. His voice cracked with emotion. Instead, we found a human child named Egen, maybe 8 years old by their development standards. She was standing at a podium not unlike this one, reading names from a long list. The chamber fell so silent that individual breathing patterns from different species created a complex, haunting rhythm. At first, we thought it was standard war commemoration. She read human names, soldiers who had died fighting us, civilians, killed in our bombardments, families torn apart by our invasion. The kind of memorial service every species holds for their war dead. Vexthal's mandibles clicked once, a sound of profound sorrow. But then Egen did something that our intelligence analysts took 3 attempts to verify. Something so unprecedented that our military computers couldn't process it. His voice grew stronger, more urgent, as if the memory was forcing itself out. She began reading Zephyr names, our names. The soldiers we'd lost in battle, names she somehow knew, names she'd learned to pronounce in our language despite never meeting any of our kind. A ripple of disbelief went through the assembled beings. Several species began rapid discussions, the implications of what they were. Hearing causing visible distress among multiple cultures. Kethma of the 23rd Assault Division, Vorthkul of the Heavy Artillery Corps, Zexteran of the Orbital Strike Force. One by one, this human child read the names of our dead with the same reverence she'd shown for her own people. Vexthal's voice began to tremble. Then she said something that shattered the foundation of everything we believed about this war. Her words were transmitted across our entire fleet, heard by every soldier, every officer, every crew member in the invasion force. The silence stretched like a held breath across the entire chamber. She said, these were someone's sons and daughters. They died far from home, fighting for something they might not have believed in. They came to our worlds as enemies, but they were still people with families who loved them. We remember them too, because forgetting the dead, any dead, makes us less than what we should be. The warrior's voice broke completely, and for several moments he stood at the podium unable to speak. his massive form shaking with suppressed emotion. That transmission reached every ship in our fleet within hours. By the end of the day, there wasn't a single soldier in the invasion force who hadn't heard Yijin's words. And something inside us broke. He looked up at the observation galleries, his 6 eyes blazing with a mixture of grief and wonder. How do you fight beings who mourn their enemies? How do you conquer people who see your warriors not as monsters to be destroyed, but as lost children who deserve to be remembered? Vexthal's claws scraped against the podium as his grip tightened. Our soldiers started refusing direct orders, not in open rebellion. They were too disciplined for that. But in small ways, quiet ways that spread through our forces like a plague of conscience, his voice took on a tone of growing amazement. Weapons would mysteriously malfunction when targeting civilian areas, transport ships would develop navigation, errors that prevented them from reaching human settlements. Intelligence reports would be delayed just long enough for civilians to evacuate. The piecing resumed, more agitated than before. High Command brought in loyalty enforcement squads, threat assessment teams, even military psychiatrists to analyze the spread of what they called empathy contamination. But every measure they took only made the problem worse. Vexthal stopped and faced the tribunal directly, because the humans hadn't just defeated our military forces. They'd done something far more dangerous. They'd made us question the very nature of conquest itself. His voice grew darker, more urgent. Within weeks of Yijin's transmission, entire units were requesting transfers to non-combat roles. Pilots were developing mysterious illnesses that prevented them from flying bombing runs. Even our intelligence officers were losing critical data about human positions and movements. The warrior looked directly at each tribunal member in turn. The hegemony had conquered 47 different species over 10,000 years of expansion. We'd faced desperate resistance, clever tactics, even species that fought to extinction rather than surrender. But we'd never encountered anything like this. His mandibles clicked in what might have been bitter amusement. The humans had weaponized something we didn't even recognize as a weapon. Compassion itself. They'd turned our greatest strength, our unity of purpose, into our greatest weakness by making us see them as people rather than targets. Vexthal's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the massive chamber. By the end of the 6th month, High Command couldn't find enough reliable troops to maintain basic garrison duties on conquered worlds. Our own soldiers were sabotaging missions, protecting human civilians, even providing intelligence to resistance movements. He gripped the podium with all 4 hands, his claws leaving permanent marks in the crystalline surface. The war ended, not because we defeated the humans, but because we could no longer find soldiers willing to fight them. They'd turned our entire military force into conscientious objectors simply by showing us what we were trying to destroy. The warrior's final words echoed through the chamber like a funeral bell. The most terrifying thing about humans isn't their willingness to die for their beliefs. It's their ability to make you question what you're living for. They don't just defeat armies, they convert them. Vexthal looked up at the observation galleries one final time. We came to conquer Earth. Instead, Earth conquered our souls. The crystalline chamber seemed to hold its breath as Vexthal straightened to his full imposing height. His 6 compound eyes blazed with an intensity that made several tribunal members shift uncomfortable. Lie in their specialized seating, the scars across his reptilian hide caught the chamber's blue light, each mark telling a story of battles fought across the galaxy. But now, those same scars seemed to tell a different tale, one of transformation rather than conquest. Everything your leaders have told you about the Terran conflict is a carefully constructed lie, Vexthal declared, his voice carrying the authority of absolute truth. The official records claim we achieved strategic victory through superior hegemony technology and tactics. They say the humans surrendered after realizing the futility of resistance against our overwhelming forces. His mandibles clicked with bitter irony, the sound echoing through the vast chamber like breaking chains. The truth is far more dangerous to the established order. We didn't defeat the humans through firepower or tactical superiority. We sued for peace because human ideals had infected our entire military structure like the most virulent plague imaginable. One of the tribunal members, a towering Vorthan with crystalline features, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. You're suggesting that a primitive species somehow converted your forces through ideology alone. Vexthal's laugh was hollow and haunting. Primitive. Commander, by the end of the 7th month, we had soldiers deserting their posts to join human refugee camps. Decorated veterans with centuries of service were abandoning their units to protect human civilians from their own squadmates. He began pacing again, but his movements were different now, more urgent, more desperate, as if the weight of these final revelations was too great to bear while standing still. The breakdown started at the squad level and spread upward through the entire command structure. Unit leaders were reporting equipment failure that prevented attacks on civilian targets. Transport pilots were developing navigation errors that somehow always led them to deliver supplies to human settlements instead of military objectives. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. But what High Command couldn't understand, what they refused to acknowledge, was that these weren't equipment failures or navigation errors. They were acts of conscience by soldiers who could no longer see humans as enemies. Vexthal stopped pacing and gripped the podium with all four hands, his claws leaving permanent gouges in the crystalline surface. I witnessed the moment that changed everything for me personally. My squad had been pinned down by human resistance fighters in the ruins of what used to be a mining facility. 3 of my squad mates were badly wounded, plasma burns, internal, bleeding, the kind of injuries that kill slowly and painfully. His 6 eyes seemed to focus on something far beyond the chamber walls. We were trapped in a collapsed building under constant fire, with no way to call for a medical evacuation. Our combat medic had been killed in the initial assault, and our field medical supplies were limited. By all tactical assessments, my wounded squad mates were going to die. The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of translation devices, working overtime to convey the emotional weight of his words across dozens of different species. That's when Hyanwu appeared. Vexthal's voice took on a tone of wonder mixed with profound confusion. He was a human civilian. Our intelligence files said he worked in water purification systems. No military training, no combat experience. Just a maintenance worker who'd been caught in the wrong place when the fighting started. His mandibles clicked once, a sound of deep respect. Heinwu crawled through the rubble, while energy blasts lit up the air around him. He didn't know our names, our ranks, or even our species designation. But he saw 3 wounded beings who needed help, and that was enough. The warrior's voice began to tremble with emotion. He had a basic medical kit, the kind every human settlement kept for industrial accidents. Nothing sophisticated, just bandages and pain medication and basic surgical tools. But he used those simple supplies to stabilize my squad mates' injuries. Vexthal looked directly at the tribunal members, his 6 compound eyes blazing with conviction. For 43 minutes, while the battle raged around us, this human civilian worked to save the lives of enemy soldiers. He didn't ask for surrender terms or prisoner exchanges. He didn't demand information or try to use our wounded as bargaining chips. He just helped. His voice cracked completely. When the human resistance fighters realized there was a civilian in the combat zone, they actually ceased fire to give him time to work. Their own people were dying in that battle, but they stopped shooting to let Hyanwu save Zephian lives. The silence that followed was profound, loaded with implications that resonated across species barriers. A plasma bolt meant for me caught Hyanwu in the back as he was applying pressure bandages to my squad leader's wounds. The energy discharge should have killed him instantly. But he used his last moments to inject my squad mates with stimulants that would keep them alive until rescue arrived. Vexthal's massive form seemed to shrink as the memory overwhelmed him. He died saving enemy soldiers who'd been trying to kill his people. Died protecting beings he'd never met from a species that had invaded his world, and with his last breath, he smiled at me and said something our translators had trouble processing. The warrior looked up at the observation galleries, his voice carrying across the vast chamber. He said, "Take care of them. Everyone deserves to go home. Not to his home, to us." He wanted us to return safely to families and worlds we'd left behind to wage war against his species. A ripple of stunned amazement went through the assembled beings. Representatives from dozens of different civilizations struggling to comprehend what they were hearing. That's when I realized the humans had accomplished something that violated every law of warfare, every principle of military science, every assumption about the nature of conflict itself. Vexthal stood straighter, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. They'd won a war by changing the hearts of their enemies, not through superior technology or tactical brilliance, but by showing us who we really were beneath our armor and weapons and military conditioning. His claws scraped against the podium as his grip tightened. Within days of Hyanwu's death, my entire unit requested transfer to non-combat roles. Within weeks, half our division was refusing direct orders to engage human settlements. Within months, we had full battalions laying down their weapons rather than continue the assault. The piecing resumed, more agitated than before, as if the memories were forcing themselves out against his will. High Command tried everything to contain what they called ideological contamination. They brought in loyalty enforcement squads, psychological conditioning specialists, even memory modification technology to try to erase our experiences with human compassion. His voice grew darker, more urgent. But you can't unsee kindness. You can't unfeel the moment when an enemy shows you mercy you don't deserve. You can't forget what it means to watch someone die saving your life. Vexthal stopped and faced the tribunal directly, his 6 eyes blazing with the fire of absolute conviction. I break my silence today because the galaxy needs to understand what really happened during the Terran conflict. Humanity didn't just survive our assault. They transformed it into something beautiful. His voice rose, carrying to every corner of the massive chamber. They taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to protect others despite that fear. They showed us that strength isn't measured by your ability to destroy, but by your willingness to sacrifice for strangers. The chamber erupted as beings from dozens of species began rapid discussions, the implications of his testimony causing visible distress among multiple civilizations. The hegemony fears this truth because it threatens everything we've built our civilization on: force, dominance, the idea that might makes right. But it's too late to contain what the humans have unleashed. Vexthal's voice took on a prophetic quality. They've already planted seeds of hope across the galaxy. Every soldier who served in the Terran conflict returned home carrying human ideas about dignity, compassion, and the value of individual life. Those ideas are spreading to their families, their communities, their entire worlds. His mandibles clicked in what might have been satisfaction. There are already reports of conquered species beginning to demand better treatment from their hegemony governors. Planets that have been strip-mined for centuries are starting to organize resistance movements. Based on human principles of self-determination, the warrior looked up at the observation galleries one final time, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. The humans have done more than survive our invasion. They've started a revolution that will reshape the entire galactic order. They've proven that there's something stronger than military force, something more powerful than technological superiority. Vexthal's final words echoed through the chamber like thunder, carrying across space and time to touch every being present. We came to conquer Earth with the largest fleet in hegemony history. We left with our armies converted to their cause, our soldiers transformed into protectors rather than conquerors, our entire military philosophy shattered by the simple power of human decency. His voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the vast chamber. Earth didn't just defeat us, Earth conquered us, and through us. They've conquered the galaxy itself. The age of rule through fear is ending. The humans have shown us a better way. The crystalline chamber fell silent as the implications of his testimony sank in across hundreds of different species, each beginning to understand that they had just witnessed the end of one galactic age and the birth of another, and that, Vexthal concluded, his voice carrying the finality of absolute truth, is why the galaxy will never be the same. Asterisk, asterisk, the end asterisk, asterisk.